All right, so let's jump right in. For decades, educators have been wrestling with this really big problem in our curriculum. Today, we're going to dig into a pretty fascinating argument from an educator named Nell Noddings. She suggests that maybe, just maybe, we're not just missing a few key players from our history books. We might be missing the entire point of the story.
And it's a huge question, right? It's really the one that kicks off this entire debate. I mean, think about it. When you suddenly realize your textbooks and your lessons are almost entirely focused on the experiences and achievements of men, what do you do? Where do you even begin to fix something that big?
While the first, most logical step was kind of a search and rescue mission. He had educators and historians digging through the archives, looking for all the women and minorities who'd been forgotten or just plain written out. The goal was simple: find their stories, find their contributions, and get them back into the curriculum.
And this led to what Noddings cleverly calls the add women and stir approach. That's kind of like making soup, right? You take your existing recipe for history, which is all about politics, war, science, the big stuff, and you find some women who were awesome in those exact fields. Then you just sprinkle them in and give it a stir. Seems like a perfect, common-sense solution, doesn't it?
Well, hold on a second, because while this whole approach was absolutely well-intentioned and it did bring some important figures back into the light, Noddings argues it has a fundamental hidden flaw. It doesn't actually change the recipe one bit.
And boom, this quote right here, it gets to the absolute heart of the critique. What Noddings is pointing out is that by only celebrating women who succeeded in these traditionally male arenas, we're still using a male model as the only yardstick for what's important. We're basically saying, yeah, her contribution matters because it looks like something a man would do. And that totally ignores the actual work that most women were doing throughout history.
And you can see the two philosophies laid out so clearly here. Add and stir keeps the spotlight on public life and those traditional standards of success. But the care tradition approach, it asks a revolutionary question. What if we studied the private and domestic world as a core subject, with its own set of values, its own skills, and its own important contributions?
So here's the bottom line. The add and stir method, even with the best intentions, still makes the central work and lives of the vast majority of women throughout history totally invisible. It misses a massive, essential piece of the human experience.
And this brings us to Noddings' really powerful alternative. Instead of just adding a few new ingredients to the same old dish, she says we need to build our curriculum on a completely new foundation, what she calls the tradition of care.
So, what exactly is the care tradition? Well, it's the idea that we should seriously study all the work that goes into caregiving. And this isn't just, about warm, fuzzy feelings. It's about treating the intellectual work, the practical skills, and the ethical dilemmas of caring for others and running a home as a serious academic subject. You see, this is a fundamental shift in how we think. We're not just editing the old story anymore. We're asking, what kind of knowledge has our society decided is unimportant and why? It's about telling a whole new kind of story, one that's centered on a completely different set of human activities.
Okay, to make this idea a little less abstract, let's zoom in on a concrete example. Let's take a word that a lot of us might just dismiss as old-fashioned or, simple: homemaking. Seriously, think about it. When you hear the word homemaking, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Cooking, cleaning, chores? Well, Noddings challenges us to look much, much deeper. What if homemaking is actually a super complex, interdisciplinary field of study? I mean, just look at this. When you really study it, homemaking involves psychology, the art of creating a space where people feel safe and understood. It's history. I mean, have you ever thought about how our whole idea of comfort has changed over the centuries? It's economics, technology, art, philosophy. All of a sudden, this thing that seems so simple is revealed to be incredibly rich and complex. Wow. Now, this isn't about, romanticizing the past. A huge non-negotiable part of studying the care tradition is confronting the often brutal reality that this work was done inside a system of social and legal oppression.
And the history here is, well, it's pretty stark. For centuries, under the law, a married woman was legally subordinate to her husband. No right to her own property, no voice in her own government, and in some cases, she was literally seen as an extension of her husband's will. You can't understand the history of care without understanding this history of exploitation.
So, this isn't just some academic trip into the past. All of this analysis leads us directly to one of the most urgent questions our society is facing right now, today. For pretty much all of history, society just ran on the assumption that an entire group of people, women, would perform the work of caregiving. But today, women rightfully expect and are expected to be part of public and professional life. And this incredible progress has created a brand new, very urgent problem.
So, who's going to do it? That is the billion-dollar question. The need for care, for our kids, for our aging parents, for each other, it hasn't gone away. If anything, it's more essential than ever. But the old model? It's broken. So, what comes next?
Noddings actually proposes a solution for this, something she calls the universal caregiver model. The big idea is that we educate everyone, boys and girls alike, to be both breadwinners and caregivers. We teach them the skills, but just as important, we teach them to value both of those roles equally, instead of looking down on the work of care.
And that brings us right back to the beginning. To build a future, a society where care is a shared responsibility, we have to start by elevating it in our schools. We've got to ask the tough questions about why these topics were ignored for so long and start giving them the serious attention they absolutely deserve.
So, I'll just leave you with this final thought to chew on. What would actually change if every single student, no matter their gender, learned the history, the psychology, the economics of care? What kind of society could we build if we stopped seeing caregiving as a private burden, but as a public, educated, and universally valued skill?